It is said that on Paradise Island, there was a man named Zia who loved exploring strange and mysterious things. He had traveled to and experienced every nearby island. During a feast, Zia lamented to his friends that he had no new place to visit. A friend mentioned an island called Fairy Tale Island in the East Sea. It was said to have breathtaking scenery, but was extremely difficult to find. Zia, intrigued, asked his friend for directions to the island. His friend was uncertain but told Zia to head east. He said that if Zia saw an island shaped like a snake's head, that would be the one. Excited, Zia prepared wine, food, and a boat. He set sail alone toward the distant island, feeling thrilled about this solo adventure. After drifting on the sea for some time, he finally spotted the island. Fairy Tale Island was not large, but its scenery was picturesque. The moment Zia arrived, he felt an exhilarating excitement. Along the way, peach blossoms were in full bloom, drifting through the air, creating an enchanting scene. Zia found an ancient tree so massive that it would take several people to embrace its trunk. He sat beneath it. He opened a jar of wine and drank heartily, completely relaxed and savoring the moment. Admiring the beautiful scenery, he regretted not bringing someone along. Just as he was feeling a bit melancholic, a woman in a red dress emerged from the vibrant flower forest. He had expected to enjoy this paradise alone, but to his surprise, there was someone else, a woman so beautiful she seemed otherworldly. Zia quickly stood up, greeted her, and invited her to drink with him. As they conversed, Zia learned that the woman came from a nearby island and had also come here to admire the scenery. She mentioned that she had come with someone named Jiro, but since he was busy hunting wild animals, she decided to wander alone. The two of them chatted happily. As the wine took effect, Zia found himself mesmerized by the woman's beauty. She was indeed a stunning beauty, her eyes filled with hidden emotions. Overcome with desire, Zia embraced her and suggested that since Jiro had not yet arrived, they should enjoy some intimacy. The woman did not refuse. They began to undress, preparing for passion. Just as Zia was about to lose himself in pleasure, a fierce gust of wind suddenly howled through the forest. In the wind, a massive, black shadow appeared, accompanied by a terrifying roar that echoed through the air. The woman then calmly stated that her husband had arrived. Zia was stunned. He had assumed Jiro was merely her friend. But the most horrifying revelation was yet to come. Jiro was not a man. He was a giant snake. Overcome with terror, Zia hastily put his clothes back on and hid behind a large tree. Trembling, he thought to himself, "If I don't move, maybe I won't be noticed. Maybe I can escape." But the snake had already detected him and slithered toward the tree. The enormous snake coiled around the tree multiple times, trapping Zia against the trunk. Its head loomed close to his face. Zia was so petrified that he couldn't move. The snake suddenly lunged toward Zia. Without warning, the serpent opened its massive mouth and let out a deafening roar. Its long tongue shot out, stabbing into Zia's forehead, leaving a deep gash. Zia was in absolute terror. Blood trickled down his face, but instead of devouring him, the snake seemed to be observing him. His blood dripped onto the ground, forming a crimson pool. The snake flicked out its tongue and licked the blood. Zia was being squeezed so tightly that his bones ached, and his blood continued to flow. He felt hopeless, certain that he would die. In his desperate state, he suddenly remembered something. He had a highly toxic medicinal powder in his pouch. With that thought, a plan formed in his mind. Gathering all his remaining strength, he took out the powder and mixed it with the blood in his palm. Within moments, his blood was fully infused with poison. As expected, the snake was addicted to drinking blood. It extended its tongue and licked Ziyar's poisoned blood. The poison worked. After just a few licks, the snake stiffened and let out a painful hiss. It quickly loosened its grip on Ziyar and began writhing in agony. Its body convulsed violently, thrashing against the ground. It flailed about wildly, knocking down trees as it struggled. Holding his breath, Ziyar hid behind a large rock, not daring to move. The snake's violent thrashing uprooted trees and shook the ground. After 30 minutes, it finally stopped moving. Ziyar cautiously peered out and saw that the giant snake was dead. He hurried to find the woman in red, but she had vanished without a trace. After resting briefly, Ziyar dragged the massive snake onto his boat and set sail for the mainland. Selling such a giant snake would surely fetch a fortune. However, a week after returning home, Ziyar suddenly fell ill. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of the woman in red appearing before him. At first, she was affectionate and gentle, but then she would suddenly transform into the giant snake and coil around him tightly. The nightmares continued for over a month. Although he eventually recovered, his health deteriorated. Ziyar never lived long. He passed. This terrifying story took place in a small town where a young man named Timo lived. He was short, unattractive, and extremely poor. Every day, he survived by doing odd jobs, taking on whatever work people hired him for. One day, a wealthy family hired him to watch over a garden under construction, ensuring that thieves wouldn't steal anything. Timo followed the housekeeper to the garden. After giving him instructions, the housekeeper left. He opened the gate and stepped inside. The garden had been abandoned for a long time. Everything around was desolate and ruined. He swept up a bit and decided to stay the night. Around midnight, as he was drifting off to sleep, he suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the garden. He thought to himself, could it be a thief sneaking in to steal something? Grabbing a stick, he gathered his courage and stepped outside. Looking around, he saw no one. The sound was coming from a bush near the wall. He carefully approached and peered toward the source of the noise. It turned out to be a stray cat fighting with a white snake. The white snake was at a disadvantage, about to be killed by the cat. Without much thought, he swung his stick forcefully at the cat. The cat yelped in pain, leaped onto the wall, and ran away. The white snake quickly slithered into the bushes and disappeared. Timo watched for a moment before heading back to his room to continue sleeping. The next morning, he woke up early and began doing chores for the homeowners. He carried water to water the plants. He cleaned up around the area, following the housekeeper's instructions. It wasn't until nightfall that he returned to the abandoned garden. As he pushed the door open, he was startled. A table was already set with wine and meat, but he was alone. Who had prepared all of this? While he was still wondering, a woman in a white dress slowly stepped out and called him husband, speaking to him with tenderness. Still confused, the woman explained that she lived in the house next door. That day, when Timo saved the white snake, he had actually saved the guardian spirit of her home. As a token of gratitude, she had prepared the meal for him. After explaining, she sincerely expressed her appreciation. She even stayed to drink with him. Through their conversation, he learned that she lived alone. After a few drinks, he became bolder. That night was probably the happiest of his life. It was the first time he had been with a woman. From that night on, the woman in white came to visit him every night. Though Timo grew thinner and weaker, he always had a blissful look on his face. Over time, one of his work friends began to find the situation strange. The friend deliberately invited Timo out for drinks to get information out of him. The friend said he had been watching Timo for a while. Every day after work, Timo would rush home. Surely there was a woman waiting for him there. As expected, Timo had a weak tolerance for alcohol. After just a few drinks, he spilled everything about the woman in white. He even boasted that she was utterly infatuated with him, coming every night to serve him. The friend was both astonished and jealous. He never imagined that someone like Timo could have a beautiful woman taking care of him. After getting Timo completely drunk, the friend grabbed a jug of wine and left the tavern, intent on carrying out his wicked plan. He wanted to seize the opportunity to find the woman in white for his own pleasure, thinking that if Timo could have her, he could too. Staggering toward the house next to the abandoned garden that Timo had described, he found only a deserted plot of land. Overcome with desire, he forced open the door and stepped inside. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he was so terrified that he dropped his wine jug. The scene before him left him frozen with fear. The abandoned garden was crawling with venomous snakes, and he was utterly terrified of them. In a panic, he hurled the wine jug at the snakes, causing them to scatter in fear. But then, acting in sheer cruelty, he quickly lit a fire and threw it toward the snakes. In an instant, the serpents writhed and slithered wildly as flames engulfed them. A massive white snake lunged from the inferno and sank its fangs deep into the wicked man's neck. In the end, both the snake and the man were consumed by the raging fire. The next morning, when Timo returned to the garden, he saw that the house next door had burned down. Though the fire had died out, thick black smoke still rose into the sky. For days afterward, Timo waited for his wife, but she never appeared again. He eventually returned to his impoverished, lonely life, just as before. This terrifying story took place in a small town in Zhengzhou, where a wealthy family by the surname Xu resided. The head of the Xu family was named Chen, and he had a peculiar obsession. He loved eating snake meat. It wasn't on the table every meal, but nearly every day. There had to be at least one dish made of snake meat. To him, it was the ultimate delicacy. He firmly believed that snake meat could enhance his virility and even prolong his lifespan. Just for snake meat alone, he had devised dozens of recipes and even hired a personal chef dedicated to preparing snake dishes for him. To ensure a constant supply of snakes, he ordered his servants to catch live ones every day. His household staff was rigorously trained, no matter the size, venomous or not. As long as they caught a snake, they had to bring it back to him. As long as a snake was captured, whether it was alive or dead, it didn't matter. His servants worked tirelessly, knowing that those who caught more snakes would receive generous rewards. Beyond food, Chen also considered using snakes for making medicinal wine and remedies, so he captured everything from hatchlings to fully grown serpents. Year after year, countless snakes were slaughtered in the Xu household. One day, Chen rode out on horseback for some business. Midway through his journey, the clear blue sky was suddenly swallowed by dark clouds. A deafening clap of thunder roared, sending his horse into a panic. The frightened horse reared up, throwing him off before bolting away. Around him, a storm began to brew, whipping sand and dirt into the air. Within moments, fierce winds howled violently. The sky darkened completely, making visibility difficult, and the servants accompanying him were scattered by the strong gusts. Chen struggled against the relentless wind, forcing himself to move forward. He had no idea how long he had been walking when he vaguely spotted a temple ahead. Thinking he could take shelter there until the storm passed, he made his way toward it. After knocking on the door, an elderly abbot appeared. Chen humbly requested a place to stay for the night to escape the storm. The abbot welcomed him kindly. Since it was already dinner time, he asked if Chen was hungry. Feeling hungry at that moment, Mr. Chen immediately said that it would be wonderful to have a bowl of snake meat to eat in such stormy weather. Chen blurted out his thought without much consideration, unaware that the monks around him had immediately widened their eyes in anger. Realizing that monks were strict vegetarians, he quickly apologized for his inappropriate words. A short while later, a young monk brought him a bowl of soup. Chen eagerly waited, his stomach growling with hunger. Lifting the lid, he was astonished to find that the soup contained snake meat. His eyes lit up in excitement. He never expected to be served snake meat in a temple. Driven by hunger, he paid no attention to the monk's strange expressions and devoured the entire bowl, meat and all. After finishing his meal, he stayed at the temple for the night. As he drifted into deep sleep, he felt something writhing and slithering across his body. Jolting awake, he opened his eyes and nearly let out a terrified scream. His bed was crawling with countless snakes, their shimmering scales reflecting the dim moonlight. In sheer panic, he leaped off the bed, intending to flee, but tripped and fell. A massive green snake blocked his path. From the rafters above, another serpent slithered down. Frozen with fear, Chen found himself unable to move. The enormous green snake coiled around, cutting off his escape route. Overwhelmed by terror, Chen collapsed onto the floor as countless smaller snakes slithered onto his body. More and more of them piled on, covering him from head to toe. They constricted around him so tightly that he could no longer breathe. He felt as if he was being swallowed whole. He had no idea how much time had passed when suddenly he heard someone calling his name. He jolted awake, flailing his arms and screaming, only to realize he was no longer in the temple. The snakes were gone. Standing before him were two farmers, staring at him in confusion. They explained that they had found him unconscious in the woods and came to help. From that day on, he never so much as thought about eating snake meat again. In fact, even the sight of anything remotely snake-like sent him into a fit of trembling fear. Ever since that incident, he developed a severe phobia of snakes. Just hearing the word made his limbs go weak, his face turn pale, and his breath become ragged. This terrifying story is about a man named Kun, who possessed a strange talent. He had an incredibly keen sense of smell. However, he couldn't detect just anything. To demonstrate his ability to his friend, Kun immediately signaled that he had picked up a strange scent. Kun told his friend that there was a snake nearby. He could smell it. Whether it was hiding in the grass or wedged between cracks in bricks and stones, he could track it down by scent alone. What terrified others didn't faze him at all. The snake he had just caught, he lifted high in triumph, as if it were a trophy. Despite the snake's aggression and attempts to strike, Kun showed no fear or hesitation. Without a second thought, he stuffed the snake into his mouth and bit off its head. It was horrifying. He chewed the snake's head as if savoring a delicacy. Those who witnessed the scene were nauseated, but Kun appeared delighted. In no time, he had swallowed the entire snake. He even called it the finest delicacy on earth and urged his friend to give it a try. His talent was innate, and his friend, amazed, asked him about the secret behind it. So Kun recounted his story. He said that when he was just a toddler, his father and some friends were drinking in the courtyard one day. He was playing nearby when his mother suddenly ran out of the house in panic, screaming about a snake. In the grass before him, a snake was slithering toward him, flicking its tongue threateningly. His parents rushed over to save him, but when they arrived, they were both frozen in shock. The snake hadn't harmed Kun. Instead, he had grabbed it and was gnawing on it. His parents were horrified by the sight. From that moment on, he became obsessed with the taste. He would frequently roam around hunting for snakes. No matter what kind of snake he encountered, they all seemed paralyzed in his presence, allowing him to devour them alive. It became a habit. To him, even the chickens and ducks in the house were nothing compared to this delicacy. His mother believed he was possessed by an evil spirit, so she went to the temple daily to pray for him. She repeatedly urged him to give up this habit. Kun would nod in agreement, but he simply couldn't stop. His mother swore that if he didn't abandon his killing of snakes, she would remain in the temple forever. One day, while Kun was playing with his wife and children in their room, a massive python suddenly burst in. In an instant, it swallowed his wife and children whole. It showed no fear of Kun whatsoever. After devouring his family, the python slithered toward the Buddhist altar, and Kun could only watch, helpless. The massive serpent then swallowed his mother as well. Kun stood frozen in agony, unable to do anything. Suddenly, he woke up. It had only been a dream, but everything had felt disturbingly real. Seeing that his wife and children were safe, he immediately rushed to the Buddhist altar, afraid that his mother might still be in danger. In the courtyard, he saw a massive python slowly making its way across the rooftop. Fortunately, his mother was unharmed. From that day forward, Kun understood. The python had come to warn him. He and his mother devoted themselves to Buddha, embraced vegetarianism, and he abandoned his habit of eating snakes forever. This terrifying story takes place in the northern mountains, where the locals have a tradition of hunting snakes. Whenever they have free time, villagers venture into the wild fields to catch snakes, using them for various purposes. They apply a special ointment to their bodies, causing any snake that sees them to freeze, unable to move. This allows them to capture snakes easily without difficulty. On average, each villager can catch 10 or more snakes per trip. The captured snakes are used to make snake wine, medicine, or food, all of which can be sold for profit. That year, as usual, the villagers went snake hunting, but they found none. For some unknown reason, all the snakes in the village had disappeared. They continued searching and eventually reached a cave. Since snakes prefer cool places, They entered the cave and were overjoyed to find that all the snakes had gathered there. The cave was filled with countless snakes of all sizes. The villagers rejoiced, thinking they would soon make a fortune with such a large supply. Excited, the villagers eagerly spread their arms and rushed in to catch the snakes. Just as they were about to begin, a strange wind blew from deep within the cave, and a massive serpent slithered out. Terrified, the villagers tried to flee, but the giant snake coiled around them, crushing their bones before swallowing them whole. After devouring 2 villagers, the monstrous snake slithered out of the cave. Now, the roles had reversed. It was no longer humans hunting snakes, but a snake hunting humans. The giant serpent stormed into homes, attacking people. Refusing to surrender, the villagers decided to band together and kill the monstrous snake. However, swords and knives could not harm it. The snake had transformed into a spirit beast, bringing disaster upon the entire village. From then on, no one dared to go out to hunt snakes. Lacking food, the giant serpent frequently ventured into the village. Even more horrifying, it specifically targeted young children. And when food was scarce, it would hunt adults as well. With no other options, the villagers turned to the oldest snake hunter in town. The old snake hunter recalled an ancient method passed down for generations, though it hadn't been used in a long time. He instructed the villagers to find a large rooster and pluck its feathers. The villagers were confused. How could a mere rooster defeat a giant snake? They were skeptical of the old man's method. The snake hunter explained that this was a principle of yin and yang. Snakes belong to the yin, while roosters belong to the yang. Whether it would work or not, they had no choice but to try. The villagers found a 7-year-old rooster and plucked its feathers. Following the snake hunter's instructions, they waited for the giant snake to return to its cave, then burned the rooster's feathers right at the entrance. They fanned the rising smoke into the cave, carefully following each step as instructed. After a long wait, there was no movement from inside. A few villagers gathered their courage and stepped in. Upon entering, they were stunned. The giant serpent lay dead in the cave, an unexpectedly effective solution. This bizarre story happened to a man named Ma and his family. One night, while he was fast asleep, he suddenly heard a strange noise in the yard. He sat up and saw something slithering along the corridor, heading toward his mother's room. Alarmed, Mr. Ma quickly got up and ran outside to investigate. Seeing that his mother's door was still closed, he intended to go in and check if she was safe. But as soon as he opened the door, a large, dark figure shot out from inside the room, brushed past his head, and disappeared into the backyard. Mr. Ma was so frightened that he fell to the ground. Looking up, he saw that the creature seemed to be an enormous snake. Gathering his courage, he rushed into the room, only to find his mother lying there with a bite wound on her throat. She had died instantly. Overwhelmed with grief, Mr. Ma couldn't believe that his mother had been killed so cruelly by a monster. After arranging his mother's funeral, he invited a strange Taoist priest to capture the serpent demon that had taken his mother's life. The Taoist examined both the front and back yards before stopping at a water channel in the backyard. After investigating for a while, the priest deduced that the creature's lair must be nearby. It had likely been using the water channel to enter Mr. Ma's house. The Taoist invited Mr. Ma to stay up and wait with him to see the true form of the demon, as he was certain it would return. As night fell, the moon hung high in the sky. The eerie silence of the night made the atmosphere around Mr. Ma's house even more terrifying. Mr. Ma and the Taoist hid behind a wall, waiting until midnight. Tonight, he was determined to make the monster pay for his mother's death. Suddenly, a creature pushed open the stone cover of the water channel and poked its head out. Its mouth opened and closed rhythmically as it bowed toward the moon as if in worship. The Taoist immediately recognized it as an enchanted eel. Though it resembled a snake, it wasn't one. It was a creature in the process of cultivation, and such beings usually did not harm people without reason. Hearing this, Mr. Ma suddenly recalled a childhood memory that he suspected was related to this incident. When he was young, he and his friends used to catch eels in the fields. That day, he was particularly lucky. He caught 3 large, plump eels. Normally, they would only catch small eels and a few fish. But these eels seemed to be a family, and it was the first time he had ever caught such large ones. When he got home, he ate 2 of them, saving the largest one for later. However, when he went to check on it, the eel had already pushed open the lid of the jar and escaped into the backyard water channel. Mr. Ma tried to catch it, but failed, and eventually he forgot all about it. Now that he thought about it, that eel must have survived and cultivated into a spirit. The Taoist explained that Mr. Ma's family had eaten its wife and children, so now it had returned to take revenge. The Taoist also noted that this enchanted eel had the potential to cultivate the right path, but unfortunately, it had chosen the wrong one. To protect Mr. Ma's family, the Taoist came up with a plan. However, they had to be extremely careful not to alert the eel. The priest carefully instructed Mr. Ma on what to do and asked his entire family to prepare. That night, none of Mr. Ma's family went to sleep. They all hid in the firewood storage, anxiously waiting for the monster to appear. At midnight, the giant eel slithered out of the water channel and headed straight for Mr. Ma's bedroom. It was filled with murderous intent, ready to take revenge for the death of its family. The Taoist had already hidden inside the room. The moment the eel entered, he sprang up and attacked it with his sword. A fierce battle broke out. The Taoist was skilled in magic and swift in movement, making it difficult for the creature to land a blow on him. After more than 10 exchanges, the eel suffered multiple wounds. Realizing it was no match for the Taoist, it turned to flee and rushed back toward the water channel in the backyard, just as the Taoist had predicted. But as soon as it entered, the water suddenly turned red with blood. The giant eel thrashed violently and burst out of the channel. Its belly split open from head to tail, dying in agony. It turned out that while the Taoist was fighting the eel, Mr. Ma had ordered his servants to bury bamboo blades inside the water channel. When the eel tried to escape, it was sliced open by the hidden blades, leaving blood flowing everywhere. If one had not seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed that such a gigantic eel had ever existed in this world.